Welcome to this session of Mark's Gospel, and it's good to have you with us. If it's your first time with us, we welcome you. All the old sessions previous to this are up on our YouTube channel, and you'll find them there as well. So if you haven't already, I would encourage you to go to the description below and to print up the student guide for this lesson, that you will have already done the pre-class work and read the text. It will help you as you go through this study with me on this video. So let's do a little review here. So 2 sessions ago I mentioned that chapter 2 introduces to us controversy in Jesus' life, controversy with the religious leaders. We saw in the first part of chapter 2 controversy over the forgiveness, Jesus' ability to forgive sins. And then in our last session we saw the controversy over Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners, which was comparable to the highest form of fellowship you could have. So we would expect that continuing on that theme, we would have some controversy here, but we don't. The text today on fasting is not really about controversy. It's an honest question by some people who are just wondering what's going on. Now, you heard the word fasting. Please don't turn the video off and think that because you think, oh, well, Pastor Doug, he's going to tell me I've got to fast, and that's just something I can't do. Now, I may challenge you, but because I'm challenging myself, but stick with me. Okay, so let's talk about fasting. It may come as a surprise to you that there is only one place in the Old Testament where God commands his people to fast, and that is on what you know as Yom Kippur, which, by the way, is rooted in the Old Testament, in the Exodus people, Exodus event. It means Day of Atonement. On the Day of Atonement is the only time that God commanded fasting. We read in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 27, "Now on the 10th day of the 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be for you a time of holy convocation, and you shall afflict yourselves and present a food offering to the Lord." Afflict yourselves, that's a way of talking about fasting. Now, there is a Hebrew word for fasting. It's not used here, but Jewish people today see that as a command from God to fast on the Day of Atonement. That's the only time that God says that they are to fast. Now, there's other stories, narratives of people fasting in the Old Testament. You have Moses himself on Mount Sinai fasting 40 days and 40 nights, where he didn't eat and actually didn't drink when he was with God on Mount Sinai. You may not be as aware, though, that he also fasted 40 days and 40 nights after the golden calf event. We learned that in Moses retelling the story in Deuteronomy. David fasted. He fasted when his first son, born to Bathsheba, had been born but was dying, as Nathan had predicted, but he still fasted and prayed. Elijah fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. So we see that fasting was there in the Old Testament as well. But fasting is connected with the recognition that there's something broken in our lives. You see, fasting in the Bible is always a spiritual activity. It's not something you do simply to lose weight or for some other reason. It's always a spiritual activity. And you fast because there's something broken in the world. You don't fast when there's celebration. You don't fast. God commanded the people not to fast on the Sabbath. Why? Because Sabbaths are times of celebration. Well, fasting was going on in the time of Jesus too. It was quite prevalent of the fasting. In fact, we hear about that in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus talks about fasting. And Jesus says to his followers, "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward." So let's get into the text. We don't know where it takes place. We know that Jesus had been in Levi's house, so maybe he's back in Capernaum, or maybe he's still out by the seashore when it takes place. It's definitely, it has a feel of being outside. And you have a group of people coming and approaching Jesus about fasting. And this is an observation. They're not trying to trap Jesus in any way. It's just an observation. They observe that John the Baptist's disciples, they're fasting, and the Pharisees' disciples or followers, they're fasting. But they also observe that Jesus' disciples, they don't fast. Now we know that Jesus had fasted, and Jesus talks about fasting, which we already said. But it appears that that the disciples didn't fast. There's no mentioning of them fasting. And so this group of people, probably not John's disciples, though Matthew says they were. There might have been some John disciples in the group, but Mark doesn't give us that impression, nor were they the disciples of the Pharisees, because they don't confront Jesus directly yet. But there's just this group of people that confront Jesus or wondering with Jesus about this issue of fasting. And Jesus refers to himself as a bridegroom. And even though our customs are different, we would understand exactly what Jesus is talking about. Because you and I would never think about going to a wedding and the bride and the groom sitting there saying to us, hey, there's going to be no food at this wedding. In fact, it's going to be a time of fasting and mourning and grieving our broken, sinful condition. That'd be crazy. No, weddings are where there's a lot of food. And people are having a good time around food. So we get the analogy. But he's the bridegroom. And you don't fast when the bridegroom's here. But then Jesus says in verse 18 that the time is coming when he's going to be taken away. Did you notice the passive voice? It's what's going to happen to him. So Jesus is referring to, predominantly here, his being taken away by the religious leaders and hauled away for his execution. But you and I also know that it was the heavens that received Jesus after his death, after his resurrection, his ascension back to heaven. And so really it applies also to the time period now, that we would fast now, as well as we wait for his return. Jesus is that bridegroom. And then he goes on to talk about two different metaphors. And one minute, we get both of these because really they're based on science and on our experiences. You're not going to take a piece of unshrunken cloth and put it on a shrunken piece of cloth. Of course, now today it's hard to find a piece of cloth that isn't pre-shrunk for us. But we know that a bigger hole would happen. And even though we don't use wine skins, or goat skins is what they would have been made of, we get the principle that you're not going to take new wine, which still has some fermenting probably going on, and put it into a dried up old skin that can't handle the pressure of that new fermentation. It's going to break it right away. We get that. What we probably don't understand is the progression of what Jesus is saying here. So basically what he is saying by the first analogy is that you can't take his teaching and just simply patch the teaching of the Pharisees. It's going to tear it apart even, and there's going to be a bigger hole made in it. Okay, you can't do that. You can't fix the old teaching of the Pharisees with the new teaching of Jesus. But then the second part of it in the new wine is, here it appears that he's talking about the vessels, right? Would be the Pharisees themselves. That they can't handle Jesus' new teaching. That they can't. So you and I have to ask the question too, are we able to handle this new teaching of Jesus? Or are we going to be burst apart? You can't just simply patch our way of thinking, but can we handle it? And I want to get back to that in just a second, because now I want to get to our three takeaways from this text. Bear with me, I'll get to that question in just a second. First takeaway, being with Jesus is about celebration, okay? I get it that he's taken away from us, and there's still times of fasting, but there's celebration. And I don't know wherever we got the idea that when we come away from communion, that we had to have this sad looking look on our face. We just celebrated being in the presence of Christ and his forgiving love, and we can celebrate. I don't know for us Lutherans if it's a part of our Germanic culture and the stoicness of our German culture, but we are to celebrate in the presence of Jesus. That's takeaway number one. Number two, now here we're going to talk about fasting. Jesus doesn't command us to fast. Yet there is value in fasting, and Jesus saw that value in fasting. I personally don't fast a whole lot. I have, but it's been a long time since I have. But there's value in it as a discipline. So if you want to do it, there's some good literature out there by Christians on good approaches to fasting. It doesn't have to be 40 days. In fact, I would not encourage that. I would even just encourage you to start with just a few hours and maybe it's missing one meal. But you use it as a way of growing deeper in your relationship with God, not simply missing a meal. Okay, so Jesus doesn't command it, yet there's value in fasting. And then the last one is addressing the question I asked earlier, can we handle this new teaching? And the answer is yes. Why? because of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit makes us vessels to carry this new teaching of Jesus. It is the job of the Holy Spirit, we say, to make us holy, to sanctify us. That means change us, to make us into these vessels. On our own, we can't do it. We can't handle it. We would bust apart with this teaching of Jesus. But it's the gift of the Holy Spirit. And so, yes, you are a vessel who can handle this new teaching of Jesus, and that's what we'll find on this way. As we travel with Jesus on the way to the cross and to the empty tomb, we'll find that God is transforming us to be those vessels that handle his new teaching. Okay, now it's your turn. Go ahead and dig into the questions in your study guide, and may God bless you as you do so.